Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I'm honestly so pumped about our topic today because we're about to go on this really profound journey into unlocking the secrets of true self-mastery. If you've ever, felt weighed down by past regrets, or maybe found yourself stuck in this endless cycle of bad habits and negative thoughts, well, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're going to tear down the illusions that hold us back and look directly at where our true battles are actually fought. We're going to learn how to completely master the mind because, as we'll see, the ultimate enemy, it's always within. So, to guide us today, we're pulling our insights directly from a truly foundational text. This is The Laws of Great Enlightenment by Ryuho Okawa. And specifically, we're going to be looking really closely at Chapter 1, which was originally delivered on October 10th, 1996. This chapter is basically a masterclass in understanding human nature. It tackles a super universal problem. How do we actually overcome our past sins and that deep psychological confusion that just kind of clouds our daily lives? The answers in here are absolutely timeless, but more importantly, they are incredibly practical. All right, here's our roadmap for today. 1. The story of Angulimala. 2. The enemy is within. 3. Mastering the 5 desires. 4. Liberation through faith. And 5. Liberation through wisdom. Okay, let's jump right into section 1. The story of Angulimala, from darkness to light. We're going to go back thousands of years for a second to look at a story of extreme transformation, because this really sets the baseline for everything we're about to talk about. I want you to really think about something for a moment. Can the darkest past truly be forgiven? We all carry baggage, right? We've all said or done things we deeply regret, things that literally keep us up at night. And sometimes that psychological burden feels so heavy we convince ourselves we're just broken, that we can never change. But what if that burden was almost unimaginably dark? Could someone with a truly horrific past ever actually find peace? Well, the source text answers this by pointing to a historical figure named Angulimala. The text recounts how this guy was, no exaggeration, a mass murderer. He was on this unbelievably violent path, trying to kill 1,000 people. I mean, by any standard, modern or ancient, this is a person you'd think is entirely beyond saving. But the Buddha actually took him in as a disciple, and through rigorous practice and this incredibly deep devotion, Angulimala completely transformed. He didn't just, become a functioning member of society, he achieved pure enlightenment. The source uses this extreme example to make a brilliant point. If a guy carrying the crushing weight of 1,000 murders can find inner peace and clear his past, then absolutely anyone, and that includes you and me, can overcome our own everyday regrets. Moving on to section 2, The Enemy is Within, Diagnosing Our Unhappiness. So, if our past doesn't have to define us, what's actually causing our present unhappiness? We really need to diagnose the root of our daily struggles. Think about it. When things go wrong, we almost always point our fingers at the outside world. We blame society, we blame temptation, a toxic workplace, or just, plain bad luck. We tell ourselves if only my circumstances were different, I'd be happy. But the text forcefully argues that this is a total delusion. The true cause of unhappiness is actually inner weakness. It's the act of giving in to your own mind. The enemy isn't out there, the enemy is within. We become unhappy because we surrender to our own internal chaos instead of taking charge of it. Which brings us to section 3, Mastering the 5 Desires, Taking Back Control. Okay, so if the enemy is inside us, we need to know exactly what it looks like if we're going to fight it, right? Human vulnerability basically breaks down into 5 highly relatable categories. The text calls these the 5 human desires, and they constantly drain our mental energy: wealth, sex, food and drink, fame, and sleep. Now, these aren't inherently evil on their own, but they are the primary avenues where our inner weakness shows up. When we obsess over money, when we're driven by lust or gluttony, desperate for status, or honestly, even when we just give in to laziness and oversleeping, we are letting these desires completely dictate our actions. I challenge you right now, which one of these is steering your life? Which desire is causing you the most turmoil today? To stop being tossed around by all these cravings, the text introduces a really crucial countermeasure: implementing kai, or precepts. Actually, think of these like moral guardrails for your mind. By setting strong boundaries for yourself, you're actively guarding your inner world from getting hijacked. With these precepts in place, you just stop being swayed by those 5 desires. You aren't just this reactive victim to every little frustration that pops up anymore. It allows you to finally step up and become the true master of the mind. You're back in the driver's seat. Let's look at how we get there in section 4, Liberation through Faith, Shingedatsu. So becoming the master of your mind sounds great, but how do we actually pull it off? especially when we still have all that heavy past baggage we talked about earlier. The key here is understanding this specific term, Shingedatsu. This means liberation through faith. It's the exact spiritual and psychological mechanism that allows a person to completely clear out their past sins and overcome those heavy burdens. And to be clear, it doesn't mean just like wishing your problems away. It requires sincere devotion and really rigorous practice, returning to the core teachings of the truth. Remember Angulimala from our first section? Shingedatsu is the exact process that let him wipe his incredibly dark slate clean. By taking refuge in a higher truth and committing to his discipline, those heavy chains were broken. The framework is telling us that no matter what is in your past, sincere faith and dedicated practice absolutely can liberate you from it.
And that brings us to Section 5, Liberation Through Wisdom, Igedatsu.
Now, clearing the past is a game changer, but it's only half the battle. We still have to live in the present, right? Surrounded by those 5 desires and daily temptations? That requires our final framework, Igedatsu, or liberation through wisdom. While faith cleanses the past, wisdom is what deals with the present and the future. I want you to think of Igedatsu like a razor-sharp sword. It's the ability to just sever inner delusion and confusion completely, using the sharp insight of enlightenment. When your mind tries to trick you into falling back into old bad habits, or when the outside world tries to convince you that you should be miserable, Igedatsu is the wisdom that slices right through that illusion. It lets you see the truth clearly and maintain your status as the master of your mind.
All right, let's synthesize the whole shebang into a highly practical 3-step action plan that you can apply literally today. Step 1, set your precepts, or kai. Establish those moral guardrails right now so you stop bleeding all your energy to the 5 desires. Step 2, clear the past with faith, or Shingedatsu. Forgive yourself, commit to sincere practice, and drop the heavy baggage that's telling you can't change. And step 3, cut delusions with wisdom, or Igedatsu. Continuously sharpen your insight so that when new confusion inevitably pops up, you can slice right through it and stay on your path. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a really powerful thought, one that captures the absolute heart of our source material today. The cause of unhappiness is not your environment, it is losing to your own mind. So what's it going to be? Will you remain a slave to desire, constantly pointing fingers at the world around you? Or will you pick up the tools of precepts, faith, and wisdom to become the true master of your mind? The choice is entirely yours. Thanks for joining me on This Explainer, and I'll catch you next time.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into something truly profound. We're unpacking Chapter 2 of our source material, titled The Power to Forgive Sins, originally delivered back on January 7, 2001. Now, this isn't just some abstract philosophical debate, it's a deeply practical look at human resilience. If you've ever felt that crushing weight of trying to get absolutely everything right, or if you've been completely derailed by a sudden failure, the framework we're going to explore today is going to be incredibly relevant to you. We're diving into a text from The Laws of Great Enlightenment. And what's really fascinating here is how directly it addresses those immense unspoken pressures of modern society. It doesn't just hand out empty platitudes. Instead, it offers a multi-layered path to rebuilding our lives when things go south, perfectly bridging the gap between everyday practical resilience and a much higher transcendent perspective.
Okay, the text hooks us right away by asking a pretty uncomfortable question. Are we demanding a perfect life in a fundamentally imperfect world? I mean, think about it for a second. We are constantly bombarded with messages saying we need the flawless career, the ideal relationship, the perfect track record. But the author suggests that these extreme demands, this relentless, exhausting pursuit of a perfect life, might actually be the very source of our deepest despairs.
That brings us to Section 1, The Trap of Perfectionism.
Let's look at how the pursuit of the ideal, which, sounds like a good thing on paper, can actually become a highly dangerous trap. The author points out a devastating reality here. Extreme perfectionism is identified not just as a quirky personality trait, but as a root cause of modern despair. It's even deeply tied to the tragic rise in suicide we're seeing in contemporary society. Think about it. When your baseline standard is absolute perfection, any failure literally feels like the end of the world. The text argues that this unforgiving brand of perfectionism leaves people with absolutely zero psychological safety net when things inevitably go wrong.
And this perfectly illustrates a fatal disconnect. When we buy into the illusion of a perfect life, expecting a flawless existence where everything just magically goes according to plan, we are completely unequipped to navigate our actual flawed world.
So the crucial takeaway here is that living entirely in this mindset means we're unable to handle the reality of human imperfection. That massive gap between expectation and reality, it just becomes a breeding ground for severe emotional crisis.
Moving right along to Section 2, Embracing Human Imperfection.
Now that we understand the trap, how do we bridge that gap? Well, the source grounds its philosophy firmly in real-world inevitabilities. We're talking about unexpected accidents, maybe encounters with crime, corporate bankruptcies, or just massive career setbacks. These aren't bizarre anomalies. They're literally just part of the human experience. The author stresses that unpredictable, sometimes terrible events will happen. If you're a perfectionist, a bankruptcy or a career failure feels like a permanent stain on your identity. But the text challenges us to look at this entirely differently.
And this brings us to a highly liberating concept. The author writes that we must accept unpredicted situations and failures merely as one experience. Stop and really think about the power of that phrasing. It's not a fatal flaw. It's not the end of your story. It's simply one experience in a long, complex life. By reframing a harsh setback as just a single data point, you instantly strip away the catastrophic weight of perfectionism. You completely detach your core worth from a temporary failure.
Let's look at Section 3, the strategy of withdrawal.
The text actually gives us a highly practical roadmap for when we do hit rock bottom. To bounce back, it outlines 3 clear, actionable steps. First, like we just talked about, objectively accept the failure. Treat it as merely one experience. Second, formulate a strategic withdrawal plan. This is absolutely vital. It's not about blindly pushing forward when you're defeated. It's about having the wisdom to tactically retreat, assess the damage, and rest. And third, use that withdrawal period to gather your strength so you can prepare to restart and rebuild your life. It is a calculated, practical cycle of recovery. Which leads us to Section 4, Transcending Rational Limits.
Let's be honest for a second. What happens when practical withdrawal strategies just aren't enough? What if the psychological wounds are so deep, or the injustice so profound, that a simple restart plan feels completely impossible? The author makes a fascinating pivot here, noting that rigid, rational standards and laws often fail to provide real closure for deep personal crises. I mean, you can win a lawsuit and still feel fundamentally broken, right? To truly rebuild, the text points us toward the transcendent world, arguing that true recovery requires time, intense effort, and a willingness to look way beyond what is purely rational.
The text states boldly that we must believe in a world beyond rationality, embracing religious miracles and immortal truth. When you're entirely crushed by the world, relying solely on worldly logic just isn't going to save you. You need a much more expansive perspective. By believing in immortal truths, the idea that our existence and our learning continue far beyond this immediate moment of failure, we find a much deeper well of resilience. It essentially shrinks the current disaster down to a manageable size against the backdrop of eternity.
Finally, Section 5, the power to forgive.
All these practical strategies and transcendent perspectives culminate right here. The text introduces this beautiful definition of what it means to have the courage to forgive. It starts from the absolute fundamental premise that humans are inherently imperfect. And because we're imperfect, we're going to make mistakes, and others will absolutely make mistakes against us. So, to survive and thrive, we have to cultivate the courage to grant grace. This means forgiving others for their flaws, but maybe even more importantly for the modern perfectionist, having the immense courage to forgive yourself when you stumble.
Looking at the Japanese cover of the text, Daigo no Hall, or the Laws of Great Enlightenment, we can really see how this entire philosophy comes full circle. Ultimately, this text guides us out from the darkest depths of worldly despair by offering a dual approach. It doesn't force you to choose between the practical and the spiritual. It combines highly practical resilience, like the strategic withdrawal plan, with an expansive, transcendent belief system that allows for genuine grace and forgiveness.
I want to leave you with this final thought as we wrap up this explainer. When you face your next inevitable setback, because as we've learned, it is definitely coming, how are you going to respond? Will you choose the crushing, destructive burden of perfectionism? Or will you choose to see it as simply one experience, bridge the gap to the transcendent, and find the courage to forgive and rebuild? The choice is entirely ours. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring these concepts in your own life.
Welcome back to The Explainer. I'm really thrilled you're here with us, because today we are unpacking a truly fascinating text. It's one that completely shatters how we usually view the relationship between spirituality and career success. We're looking at Chapter 3, a groundbreaking text originally delivered on November 23, 1997, all about workability and enlightenment. If you've ever felt like your professional ambition is somehow, at odds with your desire for inner peace, well, this explainer is absolutely going to change your perspective. Okay, let's dive right into this. Can a master of business also be a master of Zen? I mean, it's kind of the ultimate modern struggle, isn't it? We're constantly trying to balance the practical, everyday grind, the deadlines, the endless emails, organizational strategy, with our deeper spiritual aspirations. And a lot of the time, we feel like we're being pulled in two completely different directions, like we're literally forced to choose between the boardroom and the meditation cushion. So to figure out how to actually bridge this gap, we're grounding our explainer today in this pivotal work, The Laws of Great Enlightenment by Ryuho Okawa. This text provides a super unique perspective on the intersection of religious awakening and real-world capability. It argues, quite forcefully actually, that religious enlightenment and practical workability aren't contradictory at all. In fact, they're meant to deeply collaborate. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The work and spirit divide, 2. Buddha, the ultimate professional, 3. The Chinese Zen debate, 4. The trap of sudden enlightenment, and finally, 5. Uniting work and wisdom.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the work and spirit divide.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it explores our fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be spiritually awake. Just look at the stark contrast here. On the left, we've got the myth of enlightenment. We kind of tend to picture a sage sitting in total silent detachment on a remote mountain, completely removed from the chaos of society. But on the right, that's our modern reality. We're navigating complex corporate systems, solving practical problems, dealing with people. The paradigm we're shifting today is this false idea that to be truly enlightened, you have to abandon the logical, fast-paced professional world. The source material argues that this separation is, frankly, a complete illusion.
Moving right along to Section 2, Buddha, the ultimate professional.
To really prove this point, the text throws a massive curveball at our traditional assumptions. It reintroduces the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, not just as an icon of peace, but as an incredibly capable organizational leader. The text points out that Buddha wasn't just sitting under a tree his whole life. Actually, he managed a highly complex religious order. He built scalable organizational systems to make sure his teachings could spread and survive. He led what the text literally refers to as a dedicated professional group. In modern terms, the Buddha was demonstrating supreme practical workability. He was a master system builder, kind of like a highly effective modern CEO, which proves that deep spiritual insight translates directly into exceptional practical management. So the crucial point we really need to look at is right here in this definition. According to the text, workability in a spiritual context isn't just about, closing a sale or formatting a spreadsheet. It is the practical, real-world manifestation of inner enlightenment. You achieve it through logic, through the creation of effective systems, and through professional leadership. High-level religious enlightenment and practical work capability, they're basically two sides of the exact same coin. Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. The Chinese Zen debate. We're traveling back to ancient China now, and the text uses this legendary historical dialectic to show us what happens when we try to take shortcuts. We're looking at a fascinating historical rivalry between two major schools of Chinese Zen Buddhism. On the left, we have Shenju, who championed gradual enlightenment. This is the thesis of steady, daily effort, emphasizing that wisdom is built step by step through continuous practice. And on the right, we have his rival, Huinong, representing sudden enlightenment, or Tongo Zen. This is the antithesis, right? The idea that enlightenment can strike all at once in just a flash of pure intuition. Which brings us to Section 4, the trap of sudden enlightenment. I mean, sudden flashes of insight sound incredibly appealing, especially in our modern culture where we want everything instantly, right? But our source material actually has a very harsh critique of those who seek this easy way out. The text explicitly critiques the bias of Tongo Zen, or sudden enlightenment. It specifically calls out the danger of seeking easy enlightenment while completely ignoring logic, academia, and daily effort. The author argues that bypassing the intellect, skipping academic study, and avoiding the real friction of hard, daily work just to find a spiritual shortcut is a hugely dangerous trap. You just can't skip to the end. And this slide brilliantly illustrates exactly why trying to take a shortcut completely backfires. Just look at this progression. Step 1. You ignore logical reasoning and rigorous study. Step 2, you skip the daily practical effort, the actual work part of workability. And then step 3, you inevitably arrive at a superficial, highly biased understanding of reality. True depth, true spiritual awakening, it literally requires the friction and discipline that academic study and practical professional work provide. All right, let's wrap this up with Section 5, Uniting Work and Wisdom. So let's bring these historical detours from ancient India and China right back home for us today. We need to look at the ultimate synthesis of these ideas. Grounding ourselves once again in the original Japanese text of the Laws of Great Enlightenment, we arrive at its core inescapable thesis. In the modern era, polishing your practical skills, expanding your education, and deepening your spiritual enlightenment are not separate activities. They are, in fact, one and the exact same process.
This is absolutely the ultimate takeaway you should grab from this explainer. Your daily grind is your spiritual practice. You don't need to quit your job, abandon society, or retreat to a mountain to find enlightenment. Your daily efforts, your logical problem solving, your academic study, and your professional growth, these are the exact tools you use to achieve awakening. When you build a better system at work, when you lead a team with clarity, when you apply pure logic to a complex problem, you are practicing the very same work ability that the Buddha himself demonstrated. Which leaves us with this final provocative question. Knowing that practical capability and spiritual depth are completely unified, how are you going to view your inbox or your next stressful meeting differently tomorrow? Will you see it as a distraction from your peace? Or will you recognize it as the very dojo where your true enlightenment is forged? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I genuinely hope this completely changes the way you approach your work tomorrow. Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us today because, honestly, we're about to unpack a truly profound philosophical shift. We're going to take a concept that has literally confused spiritual seekers for centuries and just completely turn it on its head. So if you've ever felt, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the universe or wondered how your individual life actually connects to the grander scheme of things, you are in the exact right place. Get ready, because we are exploring a massive paradigm shift in how we understand our very existence. So does enlightenment mean erasing yourself entirely? I mean, that's a massive question, right? When you hear terms like emptiness or no self in Eastern philosophy, what actually comes to mind? For a lot of us, it sounds like vanishing. It sounds like you meditate for decades, only to realize that you, your unique personality, your dreams, your loves simply don't matter. Or worse, that they don't even exist. But today, we're challenging that assumption head on. We're going to see exactly why true enlightenment is actually the complete opposite of emptiness or nihilism. Okay, let's dive into this. The source material for our explainer today is Ryuho Okawa's groundbreaking book, The Laws of Great Enlightenment. And we're going to zero in specifically on Chapter 4. Now, this chapter is incredibly special because the author isn't just reciting some dry, ancient academic theory. No, he's recounting his very own moment of spiritual awakening. He takes us step by step through his personal realization to reveal the true beating heart of enlightenment. Here is a quick look at our roadmap. First, we'll look at the fundamental misunderstanding of the no self. Second, the moment of awakening. Third, discovering the great self. Fourth, the oneness of self and others. And finally, the universal life energy. All right, Section 1, Misunderstanding the No Self. Let's start right at the beginning with the intellectual friction that trips so many people up. In Buddhist philosophy, there's this core concept known as muga, which translates to no self. But here is the common trap. People end up viewing no self as pure nihilism, self-denial, or just outright meaninglessness. It is tragically misunderstood. People hear no self and they immediately think it means denying their own existence, acting as some kind of martyr, or believing life is just a void of nothingness. Honestly, if you interpret that way, enlightenment sounds incredibly depressing. But the source text argues that this interpretation completely misses the mark. It's a fundamental misread of what was actually being taught. Moving on to Section 2, the moment of awakening. This really brings us to the turning point of our explainer. Now, what's really interesting here is how Ryuho Okawa reflects on his own spiritual awakening to clarify this whole misunderstanding of muga. Like I said, he isn't giving us a textbook definition. He is describing the direct, profound experience of actually touching the universe's absolute truths. And through this incredible spiritual realization, he discovered that true awakening isn't about fading into nothingness at all. It's actually a highly active, living cosmic reality. So what is the actual definition then? Well, muga, or no self, is the act of releasing attachment to the small self, so you can awaken to a great self that is directly connected to the cosmic source, which is referred to here as the fundamental Buddha. Think of the small self as your everyday ego. Your daily worries, your selfish desires, your anxieties about how you look or what people think of you.
Muga doesn't mean deleting your existence, it means deleting that tiny, restrictive ego so you can actually expand. It is a massive expansion of the self, stretching out to connect with the divine root of the whole universe. Which brings us to section 3, discovering the great self. Let's move into the solution phase of this paradigm shift. This beautifully illustrates the massive leap we're talking about. Instead of that common misunderstanding of nihilism, self-denial, and a dark, empty box, the true meaning reveals the great self, universal connection, and true cosmic oneness. It's an immense shift from a restrictive, almost punishing mindset to a ridiculously empowering worldview. You aren't becoming nothing. You're actually realizing that you are a part of everything. And this builds into a really active psychological progression. Step 1, you actively abandon the small self. You basically have to let go of the petty grievances and those little ego-driven desires. Step 2, once all that static is cleared away, you can connect with the cosmic source. You finally open yourself up to the universe. And then step 3, through that connection, you awaken to the great self. You realize your true identity is vastly larger and infinitely more capable than you ever even imagined. It's an amazing step-by-step journey of spiritual evolution. All right, section 4, oneness of self and others. This realization has some profoundly immediate effects on our everyday human relationships. Because once you awaken to the great self, you begin transcending the artificial boundaries between self and other. I mean, think about it for a second. If we are all fundamentally connected to the exact same cosmic source, if we are all just different expressions of the same great self, how in the world can we remain separate from each other? That wall you built between me and you suddenly looks really thin, and eventually it just completely disappears. And because of that vanishing boundary, this abstract philosophy actually becomes a highly practical engine for how we live our lives. Realizing this self and other oneness is the absolute foundation of true altruism. If you and I share the exact same spiritual root, well, helping you is literally no different than helping myself, and hurting you is hurting myself. This realization naturally blossoms into a philosophy of universal love. You don't even have to force yourself to be kind anymore. Kindness just becomes the only logical way to interact with the world, because you literally see yourself in everyone. Bringing us to section 5, the universal life energy. Now let's zoom all the way out to the grandest scale of this philosophical framework. The author reveals a truly fascinating cosmology here. We have this world, right? The physical realm we walk around in every single day. And we have the spirit world, the invisible divine realm. The book posits that these are not two completely detached dimensions. Instead, they are both united and powered by the exact same flowing life energy. It's like this one continuous spiritual electricity that is constantly powering absolutely everything, both seen and unseen. So, the crucial point is, what is the purpose of spiritual practice or religion in the first place? According to this realization, the ultimate mission of religion is simply to guide humanity back into the flow of this universal spiritual energy. We get stuck in our small selves, we get super caught up in the physical world, and we basically step out of the stream. True spiritual teaching exists solely to help us let go of the ego, recognize that great self, and step right back into that life-giving universal current. To summarize this incredible paradigm shift, let's look at this core thesis. The realization of the great self is the ultimate realization of oneness, altruism, and universal love. It all just connects so beautifully. You start by correcting a major misunderstanding about emptiness. You let go of the tiny ego. You connect to the cosmic source. And the inevitable result of all that realization isn't loneliness at all. It is an overwhelming sense of love and an intense desire to live altruistically for others. So I want to leave you with a question to carry with you as you go about the rest of your day. How will you tap into this universal life energy in your own daily interactions today? The next time you find yourself getting caught up in a petty argument, or maybe just feeling isolated, remember the great self. Remember that the boundary between you and the other person is basically an illusion. Try letting go of the small self just for a minute and see how it completely changes the way you love, live, and connect with the world around you. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are taking a deep dive into something that, well, it touches every single one of us. we're going to explore how a classic philosophical text suggests we can actually apply its teachings to our incredibly fast-paced, often chaotic modern lives. We live in this world of constant notifications, endless to-do lists, but what if the secret to navigating all of that isn't some new productivity app, but an ancient perspective? Today, we are unpacking a really powerful framework for understanding ourselves and our place in the world. Okay, let's dive right into this. Is your mind, your consciousness, your entire sense of self just a biological byproduct of the neurons firing in your brain? In modern society, we're often taught exactly that, right? That when the physical brain stops, the mind just vanishes. Poof. But what if that completely misses the true reality of who you actually are? Unpacking this single profound question is going to radically shift how we examine daily life, our decisions, and our ultimate human potential through the lens of our source material. To answer that question, we are turning to today's source text, The Laws of Great Enlightenment by Ryuho Okawa. Specifically, we're zooming in on the fascinating insights laid out in Chapter 5, which originates from a lecture given on October 4th, 1998, titled Always Walk with Buddha. This text provides a brilliantly structured guide for bringing fundamental Buddhist teachings right into contemporary life. It outlines this truly amazing journey, taking us from a deep inward reflection on the nature of the soul all the way outward to how we actually impact society. Awakening the spiritual self. To begin this journey, the text suggests we really have to start from the inside out. The source material draws a very distinct, hard line here between the physical brain and the spiritual mind. On one side, you have the physical brain. It's biological, it's made of flesh, and its function is entirely temporary. It essentially belongs to this specific earthly life. On the other side, the text asserts that your core consciousness does not reside in that physical brain at all. Rather, the true essence of the mind is located within your spiritual body, and that is eternal. So, in this view, the physical body is basically a temporary vehicle, while the spiritual mind is the eternal driver. Understanding that eternal nature leads us to a really beautiful concept, the Buddha nature. The text describes this using a highly encouraging metaphor, referring to your inner essence as pure gold. Think about that for a second. If you drop a solid piece of gold into the mud, it gets dirty. Maybe don't try that at home, but it never actually stops being gold. The source teaches that through meditation and deep self-reflection, we can basically wash away the mud of daily life. The whole premise is that you aren't fundamentally broken. You just need a little dusting off. And by discovering this pure gold within, the text teaches that you can achieve a profound sense of unity with Buddha. What is true freedom? Now, what's really interesting about this concept is that once you identify your true spiritual nature, the text argues we must completely redefine what freedom actually means in our day-to-day lives. There is a stark contrast drawn here between modern secular freedom and Buddhist freedom. Secular freedom is so often interpreted as just doing whatever you want, whenever you want. And that can quickly become a chaotic liberty without any limits. But the freedom described in our source material is completely different. True freedom in this philosophy actually requires voluntary discipline. It is all about taking full responsibility for your actions and adhering to moral precepts. Most importantly, it's the freedom of choosing to live in a way that does not cause trouble or suffering for others. It's liberation through responsibility rather than recklessness. Mental tranquility and peace. Because, as you'll see, when you are no longer generating chaos through irresponsible actions, your inner landscape really begins to change, and the noise finally dies down. That profound peace is defined here as nirvana. Now, in the context of this text, nirvana isn't just about kicking back and physically relaxing on the couch on a Sunday afternoon. It is an elevated state of profound mental tranquility and stillness. Because you are living responsibly and honoring that pure gold essence, the text notes that your mind can become incredibly clear and still. But this isn't an empty stillness. It's a vibrant, responsible, spiritual stillness that actively connects your consciousness to higher spiritual dimensions. It is presented as the absolute ultimate form of inner peace. The law of cause and effect. Let's move to this next concept and see how this all builds as we zoom all the way out to see how the individual interacts with the larger universe. This universal rule is formally known in Buddhist philosophy as dependent origination. This is a massive concept. It's defined as the interconnected, unbroken chain of cause and effect that governs our entire existence. Nothing happens in isolation. Literally, every single event is dependent on causes and conditions that came before it. According to this law, life isn't just a series of random accidents. It's described as a continuous chain of actions and reactions. Understanding this framework is absolutely crucial because it puts you, the individual, squarely in the driver's seat of your own destiny. To really ground this, let's walk through how dependent origination actually plays out in 3 practical steps. Step 1. A thought is formed in the mind. And remember, the text views the mind as that eternal spiritual essence. Step 2. An action is taken in the physical world based on that thought. Step 3. A consequence ripples out to affect others. The philosophy asks us to evaluate our daily actions against this linear law. Think about it. If someone harbors angry thoughts, they take destructive actions, which ultimately causes suffering. But if you tap into your pure gold, your thoughts are compassionate, your actions are disciplined, and your ripples bring peace to everyone around you.
Spreading compassion and wisdom. This brings us to the ultimate call to action in this philosophy, purposefully creating positive ripples. So the crucial point is this beautiful blueprint laid out in the text for how the ripple effect operates. It starts completely internally by discovering your spiritual essence, that inner pure gold. It then moves to living responsibly by adhering to moral precepts, which is exactly what allows for that deep, nirvana-like mental tranquility. From that place of peace, you can clearly understand the universal chain of actions. And finally, the text strongly advocates using that knowledge to step out into the world. It ultimately calls for a life dedicated to missionary work, which doesn't necessarily mean knocking on doors, but actively sharing this newfound wisdom, living by example, and working to save and uplift others through genuine compassion.
As we wrap up today's explainer, I really want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. We've covered a lot of ground, right? From the eternal nature of the soul to the universal laws of cause and effect. But philosophy often matters most when we consider how it might apply to us personally. So, according to this philosophy, you have that pure gold within you right now, just waiting to be uncovered. So, how will you make it shine today? What small, responsible action could you take right now to create a positive ripple in your world? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring these fascinating concepts.